Members, good morning. I think we'll go by the clock in front of me, which is just ticking up to 10 o'clock, apart from the one above me, which means we're already running late. Welcome to Peak District National Park Authority meeting, Friday the 3rd of February. As usual, we're being broadcast live, so please use your microphones. And if you can't hear me at any point, do wave and ask me to speak up or move the microphone closer to me. We'll go straight into the agenda and the roll call of members, apologies for absence and members' declarations of interest. I've got 3 apologies tendered so far. Councillor Dermot Murphy, Councillor Jill Heath and Councillor Becky Woods. Joe.
Could members state whether they're present and also indicate any declaration of interest, please? Councillor Armitage.
Present, no declarations.
Mr Beresford.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Brady.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Chaplin.
Now, Councillor Chaplin is in the building, but he's in the room next door, just on a call or in a meeting, so he'll join us shortly.
Councillor Chapman.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Farrell. Councillor Finette.
Present, no address.
Councillor Reeves.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Gregory.
Present only declaration is that in my ward, the Peak Park Foundation has made some donations to support Cheshire East.
Professor Haddock Fraser.
Present and no declarations.
Mr Hamid.
Present, declare an interest in item 13 as authority appointed trustee.
Ms Harling. Councillor Hart.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Huddleston.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor McLaren.
Present, declaring interest in item 13.
Councillor Potter.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Priestley.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Richardson.
Present, no declaration.
Ms Slack.
Present and reserve trustee for item 13.
Mr Smith.
Present and no declarations and no microphone by the Zoom room.
President Diaz is up.
Councillor Tapping.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Taylor.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Warmby.
Present,
Ms Witter.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor McCloy.
Present, and like Mr Hamid and Councillor McLaren, I'll declare a prejudicial interest in item 13, Peak District National Park Foundation, as we are the 3 appointed trustees. So we will all leave the room for that item and James will chair that item. Okay, all done. Thank you very much. Let's move on to minutes of the previous meetings. First of all, on the 11th of November last year. We all satisfied with that? Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Andrew, and a seconder. Thank you, Ginny. And minutes of Friday the 2nd of December. Happy with that? Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Chris, and a seconder. Thank you, Andrew. Moving on to Chair's briefing. A number of items just to update you on. First of all, some sad news. A former member, parish member, Peter Harrison from Chapel-on-the-Frith, passed away recently. I represented the authority at his funeral, which was a very positive, a very celebratory affair. He was a much loved and very active member of his community. And he was in fact a member on 2 occasions on this authority and always brought with him a huge degree of local knowledge, enthusiasm and love for the place as well. So he will be missed, but I spoke to his family and they wanted to pass on that on both occasions when he served on the authority, how much he enjoyed it and how much he enjoyed being a part of the the national park, which was great to hear. Another item, just before Christmas, there was a public consultation put out on the proposed East Midlands devolution deal. This was a very short time limited consultation. The National Park Authority made, through Phil and myself, a short submission, positive and constructive, and I suggest, Phil, that we circulate it to members after this meeting just for information. Obviously, this is a very early stage of the process, but we registered the fact that the National Park Authority, and indeed this part of the Peak District in Derbyshire, and our constituent authorities needed to be very much in the mix when it comes to the East Midlands new setup, should that go through. In terms of meetings and events, I've had my regular meetings with leaders and Phil with CEOs of Staffordshire Moorlands and High Peak and Derbyshire Dales. Raised a number of issues, and we had a really good constructive discussion, as usual. And also just before Christmas, we had the delayed visit from Trudy Harrison, our DEFRA National Parks Minister, who came to the Peak District. We were also joined by Sarah Dines, our Derbyshire Dales MP. So in fact, we had two ministers at once, and it was, despite being a freezing cold day, we took them down the White Peak. We showed them some of the success of the Farming and Protected Landscape scheme. We talked about some community and parish issues, and hopefully they came away with a very positive view, but we followed up one or two leads subsequently. And finally, for me, just a very brief report. Earlier this week, we, the National Park Authority, convened a transport symposium, which is partly on the back of the aim in the new management plan to reduce vehicle emissions and look for a more sustainable travel solution for the Peak District. It was held in Buxton, half day, with a variety of invited guests from public and private sector, from transport operators themselves to community groups. James and Janet, you were there, very constructive and very interesting discussion. A first step, hopefully, on exploring ideas to reduce vehicle emissions and address the very high car use, especially amongst visitors to the Peak District. So more on that as we develop. That's all from me. The next item, the CEO's briefing. You'll have seen the paper from Phil. There are also a couple of items that Phil was just going to verbally update you on that have need to bring your attention since then. Phil, in particular, the environmental improvement plan that the government released this week. Can you just give us a quick update on that?
Yes, thank you. And in addition to what's in my report, it's just to say that the planning performance designation letter we received, we have now responded to that in full, explaining the exceptional circumstances behind that. Yes, you probably noticed the environmental improvement plan launched by government this week. It's essentially a 5-yearly update on the 25-year long-term environment strategy that was launched in 2018 under Theresa May. This is a look back over the last 5 years, and it's a look forward, setting directions and goals and so on. There was an eye-catching commitment in there you might have seen about everyone in England being within 15 minutes walk of a blue or green space. A lot of the other stuff that's in there has been much trailed previously and things that we knew about. It's built around 10 goals, with an apex goal being around essentially the health of plants and wildlife, and then the other 9 goals supporting that. It's towards goal 10 that national parks really come to their own within this, which is around enhancing beauty, heritage, and engaging people with the natural environment. There's a lot in there that's very good, particularly the extension of the FIPL, Farming and Protected Landscape scheme. So that's been given a year's extension and a 50% uplift in funding. So that's really great. We are, as a National Park Authority, leading the way we're doing the most amount in FIPL, and this is really good news for our farmers and other landholders. There's also confirmation of the Natural Landscapes Partnership. This involves national parks, AOMBs and national trails, and funding is going into that to essentially build the capacity for bringing in further green financing. There is a reiteration of the landscape review goals around management plans, strengthening them, although no new powers, and also a new outcomes framework. And National Parks England is very much involved in the development and setting of all of that. And then confirmation of the Access for All funding, £8 million or so. Now, we've known about that for a while, and members have previously been asked to approve the receiving of £131,000 that we've had and been working on. But we weren't allowed to announce it officially until it came out in this report. And that funding we're getting on, we've been buying trampers and inclusive cycles, we've been widening paths, laying new surfaces, putting in new interpretation, creating new guides. So all of that work is currently being delivered. So overall, I'd say there's a lot in there that we can relate to and be grateful for. It's probably still a bit of work for us to do in terms of really staking our claim and saying, look, protected landscapes, national parks can really be the cornerstone of delivering what's required for nature. That's it, Chair.
Phil, thank you. And with my National Parks England hat on, I've been quite closely involved in responding on behalf of National Parks to the unveiling of this environmental improvement plan, which in effect is an update on the 25-year environment plan. And looking ahead, there are a couple of nuggets there that I think National Parks are well placed to develop. One of them was around the green prescribing National Parks as the Natural Health Service, and there's an initiative that we've been involved in here in the Peak District with the RSPB recently to push that in the High Peak, which has got a lot of attention. And the other thing that was squirreled away at the end of the improvement plan was that government are going to work up the idea of a natural history GCSE to be put on the curriculum, which you kind of think, well, why doesn't it feature already? But this is a very specific one. And I would have thought, and we're already on the case, that biodiversity, protected landscapes, conservation, there could be so much to go into there that is the missing gap in the minute where a generation comes through are just not, especially urban generation, not linked to what's going on in the countryside. So that's exciting. We're not sure the route in yet, but there's one to work on. Phil, thank you very much. We'll update members as we go along if there's any more developments on the back of that, because there are some ambitious targets the government has set down, but as usual, there's not the detail about the funding or necessarily the timetable, so there's still quite a lot to work out. I noticed on the agenda that I've been so brisk, I've missed items 3 and 4. There is no urgent business and there is no public participation. So there we go. Okay, Andrea? Yeah. Good. Let's move on to items for decision. Item 7, external audit, the 21-22 annual report. I'd like to welcome Mark Surridge from Mazars. Mark, if I can ask you just to introduce the report, and then I'll see if Justine wants to add anything and go out to members then for questions and comments. Mark.
Certainly. So I'm just going to talk to 2 pages in here, which I've got as page 33 of the pack, which is the executive summary of our report. What this sets out is essentially the key things that I think you as an authority need to know. You've got 4 little boxes on the right-hand side, and those are the 4 areas of our responsibility as your external auditor. The first is an opinion on the financial statements. And as we say here, again, to translate this for you, we're going to issue an unmodified and unqualified opinion. That means a clean opinion. The financial statements do present a true and fair view. That's clean. That's good. The second is we have a responsibility to comment on the arrangements that you have in place for financial planning, the arrangements for decision-making, and the arrangements for performance management. We've looked at those arrangements for the financial year ending March 22. There's a small report that we will provide to you subsequent to this meeting, but I can confirm to you we've not, we've not identified any issues. We don't provide a positive conclusion, I'm afraid. We only say if things are adequate or not. And I can confirm to you as of today, they are perceived to be adequate. The third area of our responsibility is something called the whole of government accounts. This is a consolidated return that we're required to do. We cannot carry out that work at this time because we've not been given the instructions that we need, so we don't know what we need to do on that. You're in the same, so actually those instructions from 2021 still haven't been received. So there is a backlog. That backlog is being washed through, and it's a conversation between the National Audit Office and the Department of Housing, Levelling Up and Communities. Those are the organisations that need to provide the instructions to us. So we're not privy to that. There's nothing that we can do, and there's nothing the authority can do. The last area of our responsibilities are what's called wider powers. Now, these are the big bad powers that we have around public interest reports and statutory recommendations and stopping you from doing things. I can confirm to you there has been no reason to deploy any of those. So again, it's good news. The second page I was going to talk to was around the status of the audits, and this is just really to confirm the only things that we are waiting to do is we need you to adopt the accounts today. So our report gives you the clearance that you need to do that, but obviously I can't sign them off until you've done that. We do have what's called a management representation letter that sits in our pack. I can confirm to you it's a standard representation. And what that means is we're not asking for any detailed or nuanced or complicated assurances or anything over and above normal. So the organisation is a good place. I'm hoping that we will actually put the pen to paper within the next week. So it will all be signed off within a few days. Nominally, we would have this work done by last November. There's a couple of reasons. So first is context. So obviously I have the benefit of looking over, over 100 authorities across the world that we do at Mazars. Nationally, only 12% of organisations had their accounts signed off by the 30th of November. So it's a very, very minority. There's two key issues that have kind of flooded through recently. One is a very national issue that needed intervention from the Department of Levelling Up and around an accounting issue or something called infrastructure assets. I wouldn't propose to go into the detail of it because it's really technical and complicated, but essentially it's all okay now. And we can now move on. But we needed to wait for what's called a statutory instrument to be published, which was on Christmas Day. So we didn't do anything with it until the new year. And the other bit was just we were just waiting for a little bit of information to come out of the third-party valuer that the authority uses. So we just need to pull some information around that. Again, for me, I would say that's nothing unusual. It's a very, very complex area of valuation specialists, and then you lay on top of that the accounting implications of it, and then you lay on top of that the auditing requirements of it. Which for some people may feel disproportionate, but we would say those are the rules that we have to abide by, and therefore we have to spend time on it. I will pause at that. In summary, it's a good report, it's clean, we've had all the assurances and the support we get that we need from officers, so there's nothing that I need to bring to your attention as an authority.
Mark, thank you very much. I guess the issue for us that's outside our control and your control is the delay, and hence the whole accounts and the value for money conclusion are still to be delivered, but everything you've flagged up thus far is positive, so that's good news. Justine, as Head of Finance, is there anything you wanted to add?
I think I'd just like to draw members' attention to the fact that there are two internal control recommendations at the medium level regarding the segregation of duties on our fixed asset register, both of which are accepted, and there are steps being taken to mitigate those risks. But to fully implement the recommendations, the authority will need to invest in both a new finance system and a new IT solution for assets, both of which are being looked at, and hope to start procurement within the next 12 months for those. I think the other issues, I think I'll cover in my next report.
And I'll ask now, before anyone else does, to introduce what you've just suggested. Is that budgeted? Has it got resource implications?
It will definitely have resource implications, but it is part of the wider organisational review. It's something that we're aware of.
Okay, we'll park that there for the minute. Any questions or comments from members? Chris Finesse.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A question about the WGA, which we haven't received yet. You say the 2021 things haven't come through yet. Are you still expecting those for 2021? And will we have to respond to them?
As an authority, no. You've done your bit as an authority. The irony is that, and please don't be offended by this, you're so small in the scheme of the whole of government accounts when you think about, central government, that the procedures would be minimal, and it's just I'm talking about a form that I have to fill in. So it's nothing. The authority's done everything it can do. There's just a form I need to fill in, but I haven't got it.
But my question was, will we still expect to receive the 2021 information?
It should go through. It's just when.
So it's not being forgotten. It will come sometime. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. David Chapman.
Just simply, I think we all owe thanks to Justine and the team for once again providing the complete and comprehensive report that Mark's just notified of.
David, thank you. Might I suggest you're moving the recommendations?
I'll move it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there a second as well? Zahid, thank you. Any other questions or comments? So otherwise, I think that's all very positive with the qualifications that Mark has put on. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you. Mark, thank you very much. I imagine you want to stay on for the next item or two, please. And we move on to the statement of accounts. Item 8. Justine, over to you again.
Hello, everybody. I think I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail around some of the changes. So the draft accounts were available for publication in June, and we had the audit over the summer and longer regarding issues, particularly around the valuations on PPE. Members approved the outturn back in May last year, and as a result there is one change to the outturn, and that is the change on the general fund balance. There was an additional gain on the disposal of fixed assets, so that made a change of around 160,000 to our general fund balance in a positive way. So it went from 300 to 600,000, sorry, 400 to 600,000. And that is as a result of the timing of the outturn and the final conclusion of the audit. Other changes within the main body of the statement of account, there were two items that required changing. So as already briefly mentioned, the property, plant and equipment valuations, the final fully completed valuations were not received until December this year. And there was an increase in the valuations. So there is an increase in the valuation of land and buildings of £212,000. And there is also a change in the value of the assets held for sale, which was highlighted during the audit. So there is which was a decrease of £71,000, which gives us a net change of £140,000. These items go through the balance sheet and the notes, so there are several yellow yellow boxes highlighted through the statement of accounts if anybody should wish to follow that through. There was then also a change in our in the gains on our pension assets. So the pension audit, so that is the audit of the Derbyshire pension scheme, gave rise to an increase of 0.42%. Now, in the actual pension scheme overall, that is not a material change. However, the implication for our authority, it is a material change, and that was resulted in an increase of £301,000 for the authority. In the previous financial year, a similar thing happened, and as I was changing it can be agreed with the auditors not to make these changes. However, these are significant to us and have following year implications, so these changes were made in the statement of accounts in the final draft. And I think that's kind of most of the detail. With regards to the whole of government accounts issue, I've actually had instructions this week for the 21-22 submission, and that will be submitted by the end of February. So that's the work that I have to complete on that.
Justin, thank you. Any questions or comments? Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I refer to page 71 or page 4 of the document, item 2.7. It's referring to the deficit position on the pension scheme. I'm very pleased to see that's dropped by a third. How has that happened, please? I'm not clear from reading the document.
I have to admit the pension information that's included in the statement of accounts is wholly supplied by the actuary. That is not an area of specialism that I understand, but I think Mark can come to that.
Mark, please. Yeah,
So broadly speaking, what you're talking about there is this is the authority's share of the total assets that sit in the pension fund, which have gone up mainly because the market went up in 2022 at that point. So assets have gone up. Their carrying value at the year end went up from the previous year. There's also a liability that sits in there. Now, these are accounting, I've got to stress, these are accounting judgments that sit in there. The liability itself has also reduced. Now, that liability uses lots and lots of assumptions, including the age profile of the authority, but one of them is, I'm afraid to say, is around mortality rates. And so, as we experienced through COVID, one of the judgments around mortality meant, I'm afraid, more people died. So the amount of liability that was left in the pension fund was reduced. So you get a bit of a shrinking in 2022. The only thing I would say is that it goes up and down every single year. So next year, it might go the other way. What it does on a cash terms, because that's really what you need to focus on, the cash terms are set 3 years in advance, and that's what the authority will pay in terms of its employer contributions. How that figure goes up and down has to be really seen over a 5 or 10 year basis. So I would say, look, there's reasons for it, but I wouldn't get too hung up on where it sits, because it would have changed massively by now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Ken?
Thanks, Chair. It's just a wording issue. Paragraph 2 in the context of this document being read by other eyes, paragraph 2.4, the beginning of the third line, refers to 1.589 million being unspent grant income, whereas in the penultimate box on the following page, the ultimate box, the final one, includes 5.95 income in advance. And it just struck me that in the context of our quite reasonably badgering government about finances, anyone reading 2.4 will think, well, they seem to have a lot of money that they're not spending. And I just wonder whether there's any way of portraying that as quite reasonably, if it's correct in the box, as income in advance, which obviously wouldn't be spent yet because it's in advance, so as not to give the wrong impression that we might appear to be cash rich.
The correct accounting treatment is to put it in a revenue grant reserve and not treat it as income in advance. So it is called grant income that we've received that we haven't spent, but it's not National Park grant, it is other grants. But I'll take your point on board about how to word it, because obviously I'm following in accounting terms.
I've no problem with following the accounting principles and terms. It's just the way we have an opportunity to explain them, what it really means, if you like, in our terms, is all.
Ken, thank you. Good point. Noted by Justine. If there's no other questions, do I have a mover, please? Thank you, Chris, and a second, Andrew. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. So the statement of accounts are adopted. Move on to item 9, the annual governance statement and amended code of corporate governance. Welcome, Mike. Come and join us. Andrea, over to you to introduce this.
Yes, thank you. So you heard from Mark earlier that the external auditors have looked at our annual governance statement, and things are perceived to be adequate at the moment from external audit point of view. We've also had a substantial assurance from our internal auditors in relation to the controls and processes and framework that we have in place, which is shown by our annual governance statement. So we take on board the external assurances, and also we look at those internal assurances given by the 3 statutory officers, myself, the Chief Executive. However, I think that was... I gave myself assurances as well, because it was looking back to last year, along with Justine, in relation to 21-22. We actually have to publish our annual governance statement unaudited, which we did back in May. What we're doing is bringing it today, now that you've heard from the external auditors that they've been through their initial review of the value for money element of the statements, so that you can see the annual governance statement. I would like it signed off today, unaudited, and republished on the website, and then we'll finally audit it when we get Mazar's report. So we wanted to bring it in front of you. The annual governance statement does have a schedule attached to it, and you'll find it on page 136 and 137 of your document pack. And basically these are issues that we identify that aren't significant issues, but issues that affect our effectiveness and that we'll be working on during 21-22, and we'll be reporting back on those in due course, and they'll form part of our annual governance statement for next year going forward. So the annual governance statement is brought before you for sign-off by both the Chair and the Chief Executive. I've also taken the opportunity, because we annually review our Code of Corporate Governance. There was a significant rewrite of the Code of Corporate Governance back in 2016-17, where it was actually brought before you and approved, and it was signed off then by the then Chair Leslie Roberts and Chief Executive Sarah Fowler. As I said, as part of our annual governance review, we do review the Code of Corporate Governance and the evidence base attached to it to make sure that it's up to date and relevant. And you'll see on page 141 of the document pack the actual audit control of how we've reviewed it and how it's been amended over the years. We brought it to you so that it can be signed off by the Chair and new Chief Executive. And we've also highlighted in yellow Appendix 2, the changes that we've made this year, so that you can see the level of changes, and they very much reflect changes in government department names and also our own internal language around management team and authority plans and national park management plans going forward. We also add in the evidence base, things that are new to us, so farming in protected landscapes, and the access funding is referenced as well there. In addition, there is delegated authority for the monitoring officer, in consultation with the chair of the authority, to make minor changes to the Code of Corporate Governance. Previously, that has been done through programmes and resources, but as part of that move a couple of years ago to move audit up to the full authority, I just want that recommendation to be refreshed so it reflects what's happening on the ground. So there's 3 recommendations in front of you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Andrea, thank you. I can reassure members that this is a thorough and rigorous process that we go through each year. It's at the heart of making sure we have good governance, and we review it in depth each year. It takes quite a while, but it's important to make sure we have a clean bill of health and we recognise the potential risks ahead and act appropriately. Any questions on this? I think it's fairly straightforward. Andrew Gregory.
Thanks, Chair. This is more of an observation than a question. On Wednesday of this week, I attended the special Cheshire East meeting called to discuss and debate a public interest report on the activities of Cheshire East in the period 2014 to 2015. The external auditor, Grant Thornton, described the events as some of the worst examples of breaches of corporate governance that they'd seen in all their years of experience. Not a great day for Cheshire East. My point, Chair, is just reading the reports and thinking this through, and as someone who came new to local government affairs in 2019, I'm just thinking that when we have our induction and training for new members, whether this element can be formed part of it, because certainly for me it's been a learning curve during the last 3.5 years, and certainly reading the public interest report and seeing and understanding how badly things can go wrong, it's made me realise just how immensely important this process is. And it's absolutely fantastic that there's such a great, rigorous approach, Andrea, to how we approach corporate governance. But I do think, without this sounding as if it's turning into a speech or a lecture, I do think there's lessons learned from that whole process. In fact, I'm sure those involved in this process will see this as a case study that can be learned upon in terms of the lessons learned by the public interest report into the activities at Cheshire East. But I do think there's training and support for new members in particular to understand just the importance of corporate governance at the heart of what authorities such as the Peak Park do. So apologies, that sounds like a bit of a speech, but I thought it'd be useful just to share those thoughts for the benefit of the authority.
Andrew, very useful indeed, and it is a reminder that myself included, members come onto this authority not necessarily with any background in local government at all and corporate responsibility. So I noted. I know it's an element of it to an extent, isn't it, in terms of new member induction, but your points are well made. Andrea.
Yes, if I can come back. So thank you very much for that. It's not one of those things that is as visible as it would be if things started to go wrong. So Max Keller, former Chief Executive and now Government Inspector and Advisor and Guru on governance, it's said, and it's true, very much true, it's getting the boring, doing the boring stuff well. And that's what we hope for, that's what we work towards, but it gives the authority that firm basis on which to be able to deliver and to do the work that we do. So thank you very much for that. All of these public interest reports, they do have lessons learned, and we do review them, and the publicity on the back of them as well, make sure that we do take them into account when we actually go through that review process, which we will be doing in the next couple of weeks for the previous year. So thank you very much for that, and we will make sure that it's picked up. And it's not just member induction either, it's officer induction, because it's extremely important. Ultimately, governance is the statutory responsibility of the Chief Executive and the two other statutory officers, legal compliance with the monitoring officer and financial compliance with the Section 151 officer. So we don't undertake those duties lightly, and very much appreciated that you've highlighted that. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Brady.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful for Andrew's contribution, because I think that's absolutely right. And I think at the back of that is an issue which slightly concerns me about this report. I'm not going to suggest that the report should be rewritten now or anything of that sort, but what I don't detect coming through this report within its strength is the importance not just of proper accountability, but of that being open and being seen to be open. And I'm not sure that that is a message which comes very clearly through this report at the moment. And I'm quite sure that the need for clear accountability and follow-up of accountability was at the back of what happened in Cheshire East. In fact, it was a past member of this authority who was largely responsible for exposing what was going on in Cheshire East, and all congratulations to her. We do need to sort of keep an eye on this whole issue of where accountability lies. And I'm not going to go in more detail now, but there are examples in the last 10 years that I know of where trying to trace what exactly happened is not as easy as it might be. Let's put it that way around. We'll perhaps talk about it in another place. But some of us still have the bruises from some of that. So we need to look at that. The other thing I just felt about this is it's a very important report. And it's very important that members have ownership of it. And I did wonder whether this was a sort of report that actually should certainly be before the governance working group from time to time, and certainly be something that they should be looking at from time to time. I don't mean next week or next month or anything of that sort, but there's stuff in here that we should be referencing as the governance working group is proceeding forward, because there is important stuff in here and we need to look at it, and if necessary, come back on it.
Patrick, thank you very much. Janet Haddock-Fraser, and Chris, got you as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just following up on Andrew Gregory's thoughts there about Cheshire East, and I sort of have some first-hand experience of what was going on during that time as well. I just wonder, this is from my information and my understanding, how do we as members engage with the whistleblowing policy for the authority? Does it apply to members as well as officers? But secondly, Andrea, thank you for this report. I'll move the recommendation to accept it. But it's quite dense to read, and it's quite difficult to navigate what it really means. Is there an opportunity at some stage to provide some sort of key messages or rules for members, or what you know, key bullet points so we can actually see, do this, do this, do this, do this, and as part of induction for new members, but also for existing members as well. I think drawing out the key points so that we can really see what matters and understand what's asked of us here.
Yes, I think that's a really good point, and it depends who the audience is really. The audience for these documents are the external and internal auditors, and so then how they're presented onwards, definitely it will be amended to reflect those audiences. I would say to members, your bullet points is your code of conduct really. That's your starting point, isn't it? And actually going back to more basics, the 7 Nolan principles. So that's what you have to hold on to as members, and it doesn't get much more simpler than the 7 principles, which I'm not sure whether I'll be able to rattle them all off now, but, you know, being honest, having integrity, leadership. So, you know, I think that's what you have to hold on to as members. But no, definitely, we're always looking to reevaluate and look at how we present things. In relation to member involvement, then the chair and the deputy chair have been involved in the past. During COVID, Andrew's been involved in this and was as chair of ARP as well, going back further. So there is a very strong member element in this, because they need to be one of those that are charged with governance, and actually the external auditors speak to the chair of the authority on their own without briefings, and just pick the phone up and speak to members. So there is that member viewpoint which is taken by our external internal auditors that isn't filtered through officers at all. So be rest assured that members are involved in this, and Andrew's been the mainstay over the last 10 years.
And at times I've had a very frank, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but a very direct conversation with the auditors about some of the key issues, especially some of the challenges that the authority has faced, many beyond our control in terms of funding and pandemics and so forth. So it is a it's a direct line of contact, and it's a robust conversation sometimes that is not scripted by officers. But I take Patrick's point. There's a way perhaps to engage wider membership in some of this knowledge sharing and input. Janet, thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to move the recommendations, but I think Janet's done that, so I will second.
Thank you, Chris. Ken Richardson?
Yeah, just before we go to vote, we always consider this at our audit committee. Have we actually got one?
Sorry, Andrew, we used to have a separate audit committee, but when we restructured the committee system to make it more streamlined, we decided to bring audit into the mainstream committee instead and did away with the audit committee. I think if resources permitted, we may still have had a separate committee, but there is some merit in bringing it back in full view of all members. You could argue that in a separate audit committee for an organisation this size, not a county council or something like that, it is surely the purview of all members. And if we can, without dominating the agenda, I think the decision is it's in front of us for all of us to digest.
Yeah, thing is, audit committee does spade work.
Yeah.
And also we read it alongside the risk register as well, because governance looks at where people do things and any potential for
understood.
Mistakes and wrongdoing.
The risk register, of course, comes to us on a regular basis as part of the corporate reporting, but yes, I understand what you're saying. Andrea?
Just to remind members, it was the governance working group that looked at who saw what and what went to which committees, and there was a view that actually this work was so important, along with the work of internal and external audit and performance management as well, that they wanted to elevate it up from audit, resources and performance to the wider authority, so that all 30 members saw what was happening rather than just half the membership. So to give that visibility, going back to Patrick's point really, who was accountable and making sure that all members were aware what we were doing as an authority. So that was an example of the governance working group making that decision that they were going to remove audit, resources and performance, refer quite a lot of that work up to the full authority, and then give it that visibility that it didn't have before.
Ken, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. If there's no other questions, all in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you, Andrea. We move on to internal audit now. Item 10. Welcome once more Ian Morton from Verital. Ian, you have four internal audits to report on. Over to you, and then I'll go over to members.
Morning, everyone. This is our first batch of audit work for the year, which we always bring to you around this time of year to give you a full copy of all the reports. As the Chair says, we've completed 4 audits during this first batch. The first one is payroll, which we provided substantial assurance, which is our highest assurance level. There is one P3 finding which relates to a verification report which is normally signed off around the summer, which hadn't been done at the time of the audit. It is a bit of a belt and braces exercise, but it is a good practice thing to do, and that's where you get all the managers to confirm that everyone whose salary is charged to their cost centre is accurate and the right amounts and the right people are there. So that was agreed that would be done. I don't know if you want me to stop at this point and take any questions on that one, or just go through all 4 and take questions at the end.
Just go through all 4 and we'll come back, yeah.
Next one is health and safety, which was reasonable assurance. There were 2 P3 findings for that one. There's some inconsistencies with training records, and it certainly appears from the training records that some training is out of date, some people haven't had some of the training they should have had. There's also a little bit of inconsistency on the risk registers, where health and safety risks don't appear on that many service risk registers where they would be expected to be. And there's also a minor issue around one-off risk assessments which are carried out by the service area but aren't recorded centrally. The ones that we could see evidence of, the health and safety officer was involved to provide support and make sure it was done effectively. but without a central record, we couldn't confirm that all the one officer had a suitable review. There's probably one positive thing I would just like to highlight is that you have been doing your premises inspections, which a lot of clients we've looked at recently, they stopped during the COVID period and haven't restarted. So it is a positive thing that yours are back taking place on a regular basis, which is a good thing. The next one is around procurement creditors. Again, we've provided substantial assurance. There's one P3 finding, which is really a very minor issue around your standing orders not reflecting current practice, just around the wording, and there's just a minor wording needs changing on your standing orders, but actually you're compliant with the code of practice, so it is just a wording issue. You are quite good at obtaining quotes for sort of middle level expenditure, which is an area we find a lot of issues that people don't have evidence of obtaining quotes, so that's quite positive. And there's just one sort of minor issue that you may want to consider around the checking of changes to contact details for suppliers. There's been a lot of fraud taking place in recent years where you get requests to say we've changed our bank account, and you do have a good procedure in place to deal with those, so you independently check the details and make contact with the supplier to make sure that everything's okay. But what we're finding these days is fraudsters are becoming more and more advanced and more sneaky about how to deal with these things. So what we do find on occasions is that they will contact organisations to say they've changed their contact details. Those contact details will be changed. Then months later they'll come back and say, by the way, we've changed our bank account details, and those contact details will be used to then check the bank account details. So that's just a warning for you to make sure you do often check the contact details changes, but the process isn't quite as consistent around that. And the final one is complaints, which again is substantial assurance, no formal findings. There was only one complaint that wasn't dealt with within your timescales that we looked at, but the complainant was kept up to date with the progress, which is good practice. And I think the positive one is that the only two complaints which weren't satisfactorily resolved internally, which did go to the Ombudsman decided not to investigate. So I think you've probably done as much as you could have done to deal with those. But happy to take any questions on any of the reports.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions from members? Kath?
Yeah, I'm very concerned in key issues where it says our internal auditors give an opinion based on 4 grades of assurance. And it goes on, it said 3 of the 4 areas audited, complaints, procurement, curated and payroll, have been given a substantial, whilst occupational safety and health have received a reasonable assurance. Now, I'm alarmed at that. Yet again, the local joint committee has been cancelled. This is an issue that we could surely have discussed. Officers are key to our success as a national park, and I'd like to know what more can be done to improve from reasonable to substantial assurance for the benefit of our officers. Thank you.
Kath, you've seen the internal auditor's specific report there and management response, which I think is certainly adequate. Anything further, Phil or Andrea, you want to add by way of response? Please.
So again, just to confirm that in relation to occupational safety and health, that's a matter that is considered by our Programmes and Resources Committee, and it was considered at the last meeting when the Occupational Safety and Health Officer presented the annual report to members, and there was a follow-up email that was circulated as well to members in relation to that, because again the meeting through the chair felt that it was important that that report was visible to all members, despite the fact that it went to programmes and resources. So obviously that has been looked at. We've done a management response in relation to the items that have been identified by internal audit, and those training points are being taken up and they're being progressed by the head of people management, under whom occupational safety and health sit, so that they are in hand. But I just wanted to make those members who are on planning committee fully aware that the matter was considered, the policy was considered a couple of weeks ago by programmes and resources, but I know that the chair wanted to say a few words.
Thank you, Andrew. Kath, go to Janet as chair of P&R.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, Kath, I just want to reiterate that this was discussed in some detail 2 weeks ago at Programmes and Resources. And to reiterate what Andrea said, we were aware that the occupational safety and health policies and training needed wider distribution in the authority, particularly amongst members as well as staff. And so I think this is a looking back. So I think looking forward, a lot of your concerns will be addressed through the suggestions from P&R and the actions that have been taken subsequently.
And Kath, we had a really good engagement again with John Waite at that committee meeting, so gives you some reassurance on that one. Mike Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair. My question is also on this part of the report, health and safety. What I've not been able to understand is how the situation came about in this area. Why has there been more slippage here than there has been with the other systems and controls that have been audited? And another question relates to the casual staff. Do they receive the same level of training as the employed staff? That's the 231 casual employees as against the 244 regular staff. Thank you.
Does anyone on my left or right feel able to respond, or if not, can we get back to Mike with a written response on that? Phil, Andrea?
Yeah, I'd have to look. I'd have to go into the detail there, Mike, and get back to you on that.
Mike, I'll go back to Ian Morton.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things we did find in another audit we did around casual staff, that there was an issue, that they didn't receive I think a lot of the casual staff were more or less able to work whenever they decided, and the organisation didn't know when they were working. We haven't found that issue here. I think the main issue that we found is a problem is around the training records. And obviously that will apply to permanent staff, casual staff and all staff. And I know there are some issues with the system that was used for recording the training which need to be resolved. But I think, we're quite happy with your actions and proposals for what you're going to deal with. So, I think that will be solved relatively quickly.
Okay, that's reassuring. Mike?
Yeah, thank you for that answer. If I can just come back, I didn't see any reference to the actual recording of any incidents or accidents that had occurred. Was that part of your audit process?
Yeah, we did look at that, and what we found was quite reasonable, quite acceptable. There's always an issue that you can never guarantee that everything's recorded that's happened, because if it hasn't been recorded then you don't know it's happened. But there was certainly nothing that we found that identified things that had been missed, and certainly where there is a record of if incidents, they've been followed through and managed appropriately and are all recorded as your process requires.
Okay, thank you very much. Ian, I'm glad to hear that we are continuing to carry out premises inspections, and I'm surprised that some local authorities have not renewed theirs. We're not unusual, surely we're just doing the right thing.
I think it's a lot of organisations haven't returned to the office substantially which means there's only a skeleton staff in the office on individual days, and I guess it's just dropping in priority. I think you know, from what I'm aware of the way you operate as an organisation, you probably have been into the office a little bit more than some organisations at the moment. But it is something easy to forget if people aren't in there and aren't making noises, really.
Okay, thank you. Well, I take great heart from the fact that 3 of the 4 internal audits give the maximum assurance, and the management responses for safety and health, or health and safety, you deem adequate, and lessons to be learned. Phil, you might still get back to Mike on that question around casuals. Yeah, just to provide him with a quick written response once you've checked maybe with John. Otherwise, if there's no other questions, have a mover, please. Thank you, Janet. Thank you. Second, David. All in favour? That's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. Ian, thank you. Look forward to the next batch of internal audits. Let's move on. Still got 1 or 2 items to get our teeth into. And Justine, back to you for the revenue budget and medium-term financial plan.
So hello again, back to me. Not usual to have the statement of accounts and the budget on the same agenda, but here we are today. So I'm here to present my report, which includes the revenue budget for 23-24 and shows the medium-term financial plan to 2026-27. I'm planning to bring the capital budget with a refreshed capital strategy and treasury management papers when they come to authority later in the year. I do have some key points that I'd like to bring to your attention. So first and foremost, the budget for 23-24 is balanced with a nominal surplus of £1,000 expected. The detailed budget is at Appendix 1A, and there are explanations of the different categories again at Appendix 1B. With the current National Park Management Plan ending in March of this year, I have refreshed the presentation of the budget and set out Appendix 1A by service, rather than in the old National Park Management Plan categories. That's the only presentational change I've made. There are some assumptions behind the budget for 23-24, and that is that the National Park grant will remain at 6.7 million. And this is the same level that the authority has received since 2019-20. The authority signed a 3-year grant agreement last year in 22-23, and this included the continuing flat cash settlement for that year, 22-23, and an indicative figure of the same amount for both 23-24 and 24-25. And there is no current indication that this will change with either a reduction or an increase for those 2 financial years. The pay budget for 23-24 also assumes an estimate of a 5% pay award. This is based on the amount of increase that would be required to bring the lowest scale point up to the forecast national living wage for April 2024, which would be £1,600 at that scale point. Now, I've used this because of the pay award that we were awarded for 22-23, which was a fixed amount across every scale point based on the lowest amount required to bring up scale point 1 to the national living wage forecasts. I have no current indications on what the pay award will be, and Teresa Reid, the Head of People Management, and I will be attending an employer's pay briefing next week. We hope to have more information then. However, this is not guaranteed. The pay briefings that we attended for 22-23 merely gave an indication last year that anybody with 2% in their budgets would not be sufficient, and it was only when the final pay award was announced that we actually heard. So I have no idea when that will be confirmed to us. So just going to talk a little bit about what the budget is made up of. So we have a net budget of 7.1 million. And and that comprises £15.8 million of expenditure, of which 3.7 million is project expenditure. We also have £2.6 million of income from fees and charges, and 6.1 million of other income, which includes other grant funding. The overall net budget for 22-23 has increased by £601,000. This is largely due to the pay award increases, but also includes increases for energy, pensions and projected audit fee costs for 23-24, and additional support to fundraising. This increase is offset by £204,000 worth of budget reductions that were put forward by the management team as a whole, and this is shown at Appendix 2. There are also increases in car park income and income from interest on investments. This is over and above the increase on interest that members approved for a revised budget. The interest rates were increased yesterday to 4%, the base rate. The budget also continues to allow a 4% vacancy factor, and this is shown in the other reserves section in financing. And this is to allow for vacant posts and gaps between leavers and new starters. It was known after the larger than expected pay award for 22-23 that there needed to be some changes to the budget to ensure that the 23-24 budget would be balanced. And therefore management team were involved in reviewing where this could be made from, and most of the savings in Appendix 2 come from non-pay budgets and increases in income. I'm just going to briefly now talk on the medium-term financial plan and our reserves. So the medium-term financial plan contains those main assumptions of continued flat cash settlement for the National Park grant and continued pay award increases of 5%. And this gives rise to deficits in the budget from 24-24 onwards. However, in light of the proposed organisational changes to be discussed later on in this agenda, I expect this position to change. With regards to reserves, I need to highlight firstly that the totals in two of the columns are incorrect. The content in the table is correct, but there was an error when I was pulling the paper together, and I changed the numbers in Excel, copied them over, and missed the bottom two totals. So for the estimates as at 31st of the 3rd 24, paragraph 21, that total should read 8,674 million, and that gives rise to a difference of £938,000. The main change in the reserves is the use of the slippage reserve that we have in the 22-23 budget, and the slippage will be scrutinised at outturn again at 2022-23, and hopefully that will continue to be lower. And I think finally the balance in reserves is also subject to change as a result of the organisational change proposals. So there are three recommendations for members, and that's to approve the 23-24 budget, and to note the budget reductions, and to note the medium-term financial position as at this morning. Thank you.
Justine, thank you. There's inevitably some big assumptions here, aren't there, around pay award, around DEFRA grant, and I think we understand that inevitably there will be changes, but in terms of sticking the finger in the air, I think yes, it has to be in the right place. I'm going to go to members. I'll take all of it together, questions and comments. Start with Pete Tapping. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Justine. Pretty clear, as usual, which is great. Thank you. Just some questions to fill in my ignorance here. Reserves. Reserves, does that mean we're carrying 9 million quid's worth of reserves against a budget of turnover of £15 million?
Yes, we do. And then at outturn, there's usually quite a significant discussion around what those reserves mean that I haven't included in the budget this time. For example, £1.5 million worth of reserve are is the revenue grant reserve, and that is external funding that we've received that is not always expected to be spent in one financial year, and so therefore crosses multiple financial years. We also have some reserves that are insurance based, and so on and so forth, but yes, that is correct.
It just seems to be an incredibly large figure, given that we're only turning over 15 million, and a normal company wouldn't hold that anything like that in reserve, because it's just dead cash. I mean, I know we're making interest on it, but that's just an observation. And on the revenue budget, a couple of things on there that you probably can't answer, but my observations are that the visitor centres cost us 510k a year to run, which seems like an enormous amount, if that's correct. I can't actually find it on there now. And is that value for money? Do you want...
Pete, that's not totally correct, but I'm going to go into more detail with more accurate figures on visitor centres later. They cost more to run than that. It's more like 800,000. Right. Okay, but I will give you all of those figures later.
All right, thanks, Phil. I've also written down that the Rangers cost us 1,200,000, and I wondered whether Rangers costing that much, because that's actually, from what I roughly added it up, there's actually more than the planning service costs us to run.
There are a lot of Rangers, so that Rangers, the main costs in Rangers is headcount and people out there. I couldn't give you the exact number, but they're not expensive as such. It's just we've got a lot of them delivering frontline core activities. So I think they can, as a number, it looks quite big, but when you get into what they're delivering and across how many of our objectives and aims they're contributing towards, and actually, you know, we don't pay them. Each one isn't getting that much, I'm afraid, as well. So.
And my other question was, it looks like cycle hire still costed us money to run.
Can I go into that again later? That's not right either. With the numbers that I've delved, done a lot more research into the numbers, and what I'll present is that actually cycle hire is making a profit.
Thank you.
Pete?
Can I just make a point to help Pete's understanding? I think it may be that you're missing one of the columns. So there is a net budget for cycle hire. It's got the J above it, and that gives you the total net position. So you need to move a couple of, you need to move a column along to get the total net budget. So for some of those questions and the figures that you were looking at, you need to look in the column headed J.
Okay.
And that might help your understanding.
Thank you.
And I think I want to reassure members that looking at our reserves is definitely something that I am keen to work with Phil on.
Yep, and the chair has flagged that one up as well. Pete, have a look at that column and come back if you've got more questions once you've...
I was actually just looking at the right-hand column, which is net cost of services, and cycle hire says 39.
That has support service recharges in, which is an accounting requirement.
Andrew, I've got you, but Patrick first.
Thank you, Chairman. As a small point, I'm sure in these reports in the past, there's been a reserve for legal costs, and I've not been able to find it. But I find these reports a bit dyslexic making anyway. But there's a list of reserves in the earlier report we had on the agenda, which I couldn't find it in that. And I may have missed it in this report, but is it still there?
Shall I go to Andrea to respond to that?
So the reserve is the minerals and legal support. So that was the reserve put together following the Backdale matter. So there is still a reserve, but that's what it's headed up. But this report doesn't identify the reserves. That's part of the out-term paperwork that you will see at the May authority meeting. And as Justine said, it's an area of work that Phil and Justine are keen to look at after the chair has highlighted it as well. But yes, there is a minerals and legal reserve to deal with those minerals matters which come forward in relation to planning matters and ROMPs. Yeah.
There is an abbreviated reserves table at paragraph 21, of which some of the larger ones are identified, and the Minerals and Legals Reserve is sat there.
Yes, I was trying to compare it with the one in the earlier report. There was a more detailed list of reserves in the earlier report.
Yes.
Which didn't seem to have anything that fitted the bill.
In the Statement of Accounts Statement of Accounts
Well, the one
report.
we had at the beginning of the agenda.
Yeah. It's not quite... The two are written in isolation. They aren't... I haven't written them to be comparable.
Oh, so I'm allowed to be confused?
Yes.
Oh, good. Right.
But there should be something called the Minerals and Legal Reserve in there.
Patrick, thank you. Andrew Gregory.
Well, as a solicitor, I'm delighted to hear that there's a reserve for legal costs, Chair.
I'm sure.
But moving on to my question, Justine, I mean, without tempting fate that there's going to be another pandemic, do we still need the COVID reserve? It's only de minimis in the grand scheme of things, but every pound counts, doesn't it?
We're actually using that for post-COVID working, so hybrid working and looking at any building costs or any support to employees that are required to support hybrid working.
Thank you. Janet.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Justine, for your report. I'm going to ask about your contingency costs in paragraph 10 and the additional 70,000 for energy cost increases. Now, I do understand energy prices have been going up and coming down and we need contingency, but this seems like a large amount of the non-pay contingency is for energy cost increases. To what extent is our risk lower now that we're putting in more energy efficient systems, buildings, things like that in many of our properties? We had a report to Programmes and Resources 2 weeks ago on the Carbon Management Plan 2. We're showing carbon emissions are coming down, so I'd expect our exposure to energy costs to be getting less. Is that correct?
So this particular value has been worked on with the head of asset management, taking all of that into consideration, and it's the prevailing charge that we are for our current usage of electricity and gas for the next financial year, and that's what it's based on. With regards to the more detail in your question, I'd have to refer that back to Matt.
I think I could just add a point that we still pay for energy. It's becoming less carbon intensive. So we buy green electricity, for example. So you'll see the carbon coming down, but the costs haven't come down.
Thank you. Any other questions or any other comments? If not, can I have a mover? Thank you, Chris, and seconded Janet. All in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Justine, thank you very much. I think that's the end of your contribution for this morning. Thank you. I'm sorry, Matt and Helen, I know you've just arrived. I'm going to suggest we have a short break. Then we'll go back into the car parks review, foundation item, and then into Part B, because I'm urging all members to please to stay for Part B. It's a very important item. So let's have a break now, mid-morning, and then we'll move on. So Right, members, welcome back. Let's resume the agenda. We're up to item 12. This is car parks review, the consultation outcomes. I'd like to introduce, we've got Helen Carrington and Matt Freestone who will introduce the report. Matt.
Thank you. So this report is feeding back on the outcomes of the consultation we've undertaken regarding increasing car parking charges at our existing sites and implementing charges at some new sites as well. So it covers our response to the consultation, the issues raised in the consultation, and seeks approval to move on to the next stage of the process. And essentially those next stages are asking DEFRA for approval to changes to the bylaws, which is required for the car parks that are outside of Derbyshire, and seeking approval from DCC to make the TRO, the Traffic Regulation Order, which covers the car parks within Derbyshire. So this report builds on a previous business case that was approved by P&R Committee in April 2001, and that basically approved the expenditure on the investment into the car parks, and the levels of the increased charges were approved at that point as well. So I think it's important to recognise that car parking income forms a kind of important part of our response to inflationary pressures and flat cash settlement, particularly relating to the maintenance of our facilities. You know, notably the trails is one of the key areas. It also brings us into line with other national park authorities, our partners and other local authorities who all charge on pretty much all of their car parks now. And it's important to see this in the kind of wider context of the work the authorities doing more broadly on, you know, sustainable travel and accessibility into the national park. So the schedule of increased charges is included in Appendix 1, and the list of new pay and display car parks is at Appendix 2 for your information. Just one point to make around the increased charges. We've agreed to amend the names of the visitor permit to be called an annual permit, and the holiday permit to be called a weekly permit, just to reflect how they're actually used, really. So just moving on to the actual consultation responses, we've got a summary in the report of the main themes of the responses to the consultation, and we've tried to come up with our response to each of those. In total, there was 165 responses to the consultation. 7 of those were wholly positive, and 12 included some positive points. Although I think, you know, we should note that people don't generally respond to consultations with positive points. It tends to be the negative issues that get raised. And I think we need to recognise that we're not always able to come up with solutions to some of the points, but we can respond in each area. So the key themes which are detailed in the reports are that there will be displacement onto verges around these car parks. And, you know, we've considered Derbyshire Police's and the Highways Department at DCC's response in our consideration of this point. And, you know, our response is that we will undertake additional monitoring and communications around, you know, educating drivers in terms of parking, which we've already done on some of our existing car parks where we have pay and display. And also that we can't alter kind of irresponsible behaviour of people who choose to park on verges. It's already an issue at many sites, and, you know, it's kind of one of these bigger issues that we can't necessarily address within car parking charging. Another key theme was the importance of access to the environment for people's well-being, and, you know, we totally agree that this is an issue, and that, you know, access to the countryside and so on is important. And, you know, our point is that actually the car parking charges are helping to facilitate that by us having sufficient funds to maintain our trails, North Lees Estate, which are such important access routes for people, for their well-being. And like I say, the charges help to support that. The timing of this is not correct, was one of the issues due to the cost of living crisis, which obviously is a much bigger issue. We don't charge before 9 or after 6 p.m, so there are times where people can still access the sites, and park for free. And also, I think the important point there is we have really good value annual parking permit that represents about 12 visits per year in terms of the total cost, even after it's been increased as detailed in Appendix 1. And also, I think it's important to note that our work around diverse audiences didn't recognise car parking charging as one of the key barriers. There are lots of barriers to people accessing the national park. Car parking charges never came up as one of those. There are also some queries over the business plan. Some of these have already been covered in the previous report around the viability of the whole scheme and the levels of tariff that we're charging, which, like I say, have already been approved in the PNR approval. And some comments around the method of payment. We are offering 2 methods of payment, either by card or by phone. And some comments around the condition of car parks. But again, the car parking fees will help to improve that where it's necessary. And actually, the pay and display car parks are maintained on the same basis as all our car parks. So as I say, we now have to go to DEFRA and Derbyshire County Council to progress the next stage of the process. Obviously, there's some risk recognised within the report that DEFRA, for instance, may not approve it, or DCC may not approve the moving on of the traffic regulation order. But we think those risks are pretty low, but they are recognised in the report. And I'd also like to note that we are bringing planning applications for each of these sites for the installation of the pay and display machines that will be going to planning committee in March and April across the sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to members. I've got first of all David and then Andrew.
To all members of local authority on this in this room, I think déjà vu is the phrase to use. If I had a tenner for every meeting I've sat through that's had exactly the same complaints, exactly the same comments, I'd be fairly rich. There is no more. Our village couldn't take any more cars. It couldn't, so it's self-regulating. The verges are already full anyway, and this won't make any difference. If anybody thinks that raising charges will prevent people using car parks, I suggest you try and park in Bakewell any afternoon, because it just doesn't make any difference. And I fully agree with this. I'll move this. I'm quite happy to do that. Just one question for Matt. Will it be the same liaison with the local councils for policing this, or for charging this?
Yes, we're part of the Derbyshire Enforcement Partnership, so they already enforce on our existing sites, and these new sites will come under that.
Can I just ask what sort of levy they put on that for us, to do that for us?
Helen might be best answering that, but I understand it's cost neutral.
Yes, so they enforce on our sites and take the revenue that is obtained from the payment of the enforcement notices to provide that for us.
Thank you. And Helen, that's useful because Chris Finesse, who's had to leave for a medical appointment, wanted to raise the question, who sees the revenue from the fines that might be levied? So it's the enforcement company.
Yes, well, no, it goes to Derbyshire County Council. They see that, and that's instead of having a management fee. So we make a contribution to the parking partnership, and then instead of them charging a management fee, then they just take the fines, shall we say, in lieu of that. We can change it to the opposite way round, but when we had a look into it, it wouldn't make any difference to the amount that we weren't getting.
Okay, that's useful.
The benefit is by having the enforcement that people do pay and display, and we see an income increase through that.
Thank you. We'll feedback to Councillor Finesse on that one. Thank you very much. I've got a number of other speakers. Andrew Hart, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You mentioned two payment methods. Are you still taking cash?
We don't intend to take cash on the new pay and display machines.
So, on the old machines, you're still taking cash?
There are some existing machines that take cash, not all of them.
No.
And some that are cash only at this point.
Yes.
But, you know, as they get replaced, we'll be
because
replacing those
most of
with
those
card
older
only.
machines will be 14, 15 years old.
Yeah.
And getting spare parts for them, because that's the job I used to do, will be difficult. So you've got to move over to the new machines that take card and phone payments. You got those apps already set up and running?
Not yet, but it's a fairly straightforward process for the, can't remember the name of the app now, the Ringo app.
Yeah,
that we'll be
yeah, you've
using.
got Ringo, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. That's just what I wanted to know.
Thank you. And then Andrew Gregory.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I support everything that David said about the increase, Chair. I think just it's about perception and communication with visitors. I mean, it's £9.50 if you want to park in Macclesfield Town Centre for the day these days. So, you know, we're all seeing these increases. I think there is certainly, I've spoken to people visiting the park who see the car parking charges as a tax almost on kind of them visiting. Which obviously I don't agree with, but I just think that we probably should do as much as we can to make certain that when people are visiting the car parks, they understand the money is being used for the benefit and support the car parks, because I think there is unfortunately probably a level that's in some quarters of cynicism about any increases. You know, as I said, we certainly see that in Cheshire East, there's lots and lots of complaints about the now sky-high level of charges for parking in the town, and people have that same mindset when they come to the Peak Park, I think, Chair. So I think it's just a question is about, let's communicate as much as we can about why these increases are going up. And again, to pick up Andrew's point about the machines, I know from Matt Forrest, for example, the conversations I've had there, because we've had all sorts of issues during the pandemic with problems with cars and parking, that the mobile phone signal is sometimes a difficulty with some of these machines. So that's something which, again, we just need to work out, because we could actually have a situation where, you know, the machines don't work because of a problem with the signal. No one will understand that. No one will understand the technology. And you then get into frustration and issues about why the heck can't I get a ticket out of this machine. So I think we just need to make certain that we're moving these over to new machines. They are going to work effectively for visitors.
Yes, we've had all the sites have been tested for the viability of those, the signal there, and all the ones we're proposing are viable.
Thank you very much. Back to the room, David Taylor.
My mum should have called me something else rather than David, and wouldn't have the confusion then. No, I don't know what to fancy. I've got just a few worries about this. Obviously, the parking on the road, which has been brought up. What also people haven't mentioned is the parking on the road, which it does encourage. I've got two car parks near where I live, and both on a Sunday they're solid down the road with the cars. The car park's half empty because people just don't want to pay, which I understand I'm tight, so I know how people feel. But the problem is, if you've got the cars parked on the road, could be encouraging that. We could have problems then with other cars, obviously. We could also have problems with cyclists who are trying to get around these cars, and pedestrians who are marching around. We've got to consider the safety issue of that. It's an important point to do. The other thing as well, which I noted, the agreed charges. They seem odd figures. I mean, there's £4.65. I mean, £5.50. That's okay. £2.90. The charges are. Should be easier if they're rounded up or rounded down. Obviously, we're obviously saying now we're not going to deal with cash, which I do find offensive because I think we should do. I'm a cash person, I mean, it does discriminate against the elderly who don't tend to use phones or have cards or what have you. You go out on a Sunday, you get your money out your pocket. So I think that I've got to agree with it, because obviously we need the money, but I have serious concerns of, about them things. So, what about the safety, and what about the figures? Could it be rounded up or down? Thank you.
Okay, in terms of your first point around safety and so on, that is an issue, and people do park irresponsibly, as I say, and there's not necessarily, we don't have a solution for that. But we have found, for instance, up at North Leeds, where we've implemented car parking charges on one of the main car parks up there, where Voyage parking is a big issue. We've found that the communications we've put in place and the information we provided for people, can be effective and can help with that, and that's the approach we'll be taking across our car parks. In terms of the charges, as I say, the level of charges, what they're going up to, has already been approved by PNR, so we don't really want to revisit those, but they were done to reflect inflationary increases on our previous charging, and to kind of round those up to the nearest 5 or 10 pence. And as I say, with most of these being card, the odd numbers aren't such an issue.
Thank you. Ginny Priestley.
Really to echo what a lot of other people have said. I suppose the car park I will be most familiar with is the Derwent Overlook, which is going to be our potentially highest revenue car park. And I completely support this, and I see any movement out onto the grass verges as a result of it is for others to police. And I'd also make the observation at Derwent, you don't really see a lot of people on the grass verges because of the policing is done very effectively. So I completely support this.
Thank you. Will you second the item? Thank you. Pete? Okay. Janet?
Thank you. I also support this, and if Ginny wasn't going to second it, I would have done so. I just want to reflect on some of the things, some of the thoughts that came out of the Transport Symposium on Wednesday that we had as an authority, and how that can contextualise some of this. We think there's about 26 million visitor journeys a year in this national park, and we've had 165 responses to the consultation, of which most were negative. But that's a fairly small negative number given the number of visitors coming in and the opportunity to reply to consultation. But that's a huge number of vehicles. The second thing we found out at the symposium was the inequity between people travelling on public transport and people travelling in cars, both in terms of convenience but also in terms of relative cost. And actually coming into this national park by car, parking with parking charges is still tremendous value for money and tremendously cheap compared with people coming by public transport. And so even with these parking charges, they're getting huge benefits coming into a fabulous national landscape, a wonderful natural environment, and actually paying very little for it, even with these increases. And I think, as Andrew Gregory said, getting that messaging out is going to be really important. So I fully support these proposals.
Thank you, Janet. Ken Smith.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Matt and Helen, for the report. Just a couple of bits for clarification, really. Appendix 2, the new sites. There's a column for existing tariff and a column for new tariff, and then a column for additional revenue costs. Is the intention of that to show what the balance would be that will be going to the various estate budgets?
No, that's working out how much it would cost each year to maintain the machines, and that's based on sort of enforcement patrols, the cost of taking the credit card payments, and the machine maintenance, and also there was a bit of cash collection in there. So it's the additional So if we put the machine in, it's telling you how much it'll cost each year to maintain. All right.
Okay. The only other thing was there's a reference at the top of page 209 to surveys prior to and after, if this is approved, to assess the impact and then further targeted PR, which I wish you well with. But I wonder whether things like the thin yellow lines that have been put near Padley Gorge and the bunding that was put around or in the approaches to Surprise View car park, which seemed to be particularly effective at stopping verge parking. Presumably those would be in the other actions that might be reviewed, as you say. But if those things did occur, who pays for those? It's highway land, it's a highway responsibility, but would the expectation be that the costs would fall on the authority?
I think it would depend on which measure we're talking about. So, for instance, up at North Lees, we put the bunds along the side of the road. I think the authority paid for that because it's off the highway on our land. I think, you know, if we're going to look at you know, yellow lines or clearways, you know, that would fall under the Highways Authority, but we would have to go through a similar process, I understand, to get those in place anyway. It's not an easy thing to do, you know. And there's a landscape impact, which has always been a barrier to that in the past.
Ken, thank you. Ken Richardson.
I just want to know, in the round, does this service and these costs wash its face? Or does it put money back into the pot? And then I've another comment after that.
Yes, I mean, as stated in the report, the overall cost benefit of this is £220,000 per year.
Yeah, but there's some costs.
That's after the costs.
After, right. The other thing about the traffic wardens you've mentioned, we've got private wardens in Barnsley, and that's a cost-neutral scheme. They've got to get out there and earn the money, but after they've earned so much, we get some back. So you might want to think about that and all.
Okay, I mean, as Helen said earlier, you know, we've looked in the past and reviewed whether, you know, this is the best model, and you know, we think this is, you know, that we're not going to win any more or earn any more through taking a different approach to that.
Okay, Patrick.
Yes, Jim. Fine with the larger car parks. I have to say I've got some reservations about these smaller car parks that we're introducing, or at least some of them. And the point made at the end there, that very often, well, quite often, you come across a situation where we have a car park, and one of them, my daughter was telling me about up at Stanage Edge recently, and I certainly saw the mess there was at Miller's Dale, where the car park was not being fully used, but there was absolute chaos on the roads. And in these small rural locations, I have some concerns about that happening, because, you know, car parking charges may be illogical, and it may not be very sort of charitable, but car parking charges are like the old saying about paying taxes in sorrow and rates in anger. People do not like paying for car parking charges, and very often they will park anywhere they can to avoid it. And I do worry about whether there is the ability to really encourage people to use some of these smaller sites in some of these more remote areas, and whether there is the will. And it's a will that you do see in other national parks amongst the highway authorities covering our area, actually to play their part in this. You certainly see it in the Lake District, where I've just been, and I've seen it in the Dales and one or two other areas. I don't necessarily see it here, and it took a pretty bad situation at Miller's Dale, for example, to actually finally persuade the county council to do something about it, something that should have been done 2 or 3 years earlier. So I do have some reservations about some of the smaller additional car parks.
Patrick, thank you. Noted. David, I'll come back to you, and then Andrew Gregory, but just briefly, please.
Yeah, just 2 quick questions. Overnight parking with camper vans. I mean, there's regularly on Millersdale car park. and I'm sure you've been involved with the Castleton bit, Matt, where between the bottom of the Winnets Pass and the Blue John mine turnaround, there were 95 camper vans parked there the other week. So I wonder if there's any way we can prevent that. And the final question, if I leave my badge on the dashboard, do I get free parking?
No, you don't. In answer to your second question, you have to pay like everyone else. In terms of the camper vans, I mean, one of the benefits of this is that it does allow us to enforce no overnight parking on some of the new car parks, and there are actually some additional car parks where we've got that ability. We've now got that ability to enforce overnight, where we're not actually charging, but we have that enforcement ability. Practicalities of doing that are another thing, you know, but it does at least give us those powers at this point.
Thank you very much. And finally, Andrew Gregory.
Just quickly, Joe, just picking up on the points about, you know, not using the car parks and parking on the verge. I mean, we had massive problems during the pandemic around the Mount Forest, and one of the things that I felt worked well was the fact that within the Macclesfield Forest Working Group, which is a Cheshire East sponsored committee, we had Martin Winder from the Peak, the Ranger, doing a great job. We had the local police force out, and we had United Utilities actually employing some additional resource to talk to motorists about doing the responsible thing and not parking on verges and not blocking it. And I think the reality, Matt, is that's the way forward. It's a multi-party approach to actually dealing with these issues ultimately, and it's the only way really that can be moved forward, I think.
Thank you, Andrew. That brings it to a close. It's been moved and seconded. The recommendations are in front of you. All in favour? Thank you very much. Anyone against? And any abstentions? That's 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. That's been passed. The next item is item 13, where I'm going to ask James to chair, and I will leave the room for this item.
Well, thank you, members. You will have noticed that our 3 foundation members have left the room. So that's obviously Andrew, Zahid and Colin. You'll have seen the paper in front of you. You'll have read the paper. You'll have seen the recommendations. I think it's fairly self-evident in that which we are trying to achieve. A brief personal observation first, if I may, and that is we've nurtured the foundation for a number of years now, and it has done extremely well. However, now is the time to somewhat cut the apron strings and let the foundation grow and develop into much more of an independent organisation, so that it can, of course, employ its own staff, but be rather more ambitious in some of the funding that it can go for. You'll also note in the report, and I think this is an important point, that the authority is going to move towards the appointment of a grants officer. And I would say that I think during the time that the foundation has been successfully in operation, there's been a little bit of confusion as to what monies we go after and what monies the foundation goes after. This is a clearer split. And if we go for a grants officer, which I believe we will be able to access, I hope, bigger, more impactful areas of funding that we can bring to our own operations. So I think that's an important distinction between the 2 raison d'etres of the funding streams. Sarah Wilkes, who is our head of engagement, is with us today.
So before I ask any or invite any comment, can I ask Sarah to give a rather more background to the paper?
Thank you, James. So this paper's kind of doing two things at once. We have to have supposed to bring the annual report to members every year. So it is asking you to note our annual report, which I hope you've all had hard copies of just before Christmas. If you haven't got one of those, I've put some out in the garden room so you can pick them up, and you've got the link to where it is online in the end of the paper as well. So the foundation's kind of been in existence for the last 4 years. We had an MOU that was set up when it started that lasted 3 years, which we extended last year to give us a chance to have a look and see what would be the best way forward. What we're doing now is bringing you what we believe is the best way forward that has the full support of the trustees as well. So asking you to kind of agree that outline principle that we give the foundation a lump of money with which they can then employ their own staff. We're fixing that for 5 years, with that reducing in the last 2 years of that term by 20% each year. To do that, we haven't quite got all the paperwork finally finished and agreed, so we will have to have a small extension of the current MOU until we've got that in place. And we're also going to ask you to give us delegated permission to sign that off with James, Phil and Andrea, I think. Is that right? And Janet, yes. So we've got that spread. And I must say the foundation has done an amazing job. We've all been very impressed with what it's managed to do in that time, especially over COVID. The way it's grown, especially the Peak Partner partnership, which brings that corporate funding in, has been really, really pleasing to see, and really lovely the fact that people are still lining up and wanting to take that on board. The trustees have obviously discussed this and are now really happy to take on that responsibility and are gearing themselves up to be able to do that. As part of that, they are looking at the makeup of the trustee board to make sure that that gives them the skills that they need to be able to do that going forward. And they're getting ready, thinking about exactly what the roles of the staff they employ will be. I think it'll be really good that we are going to offer them accommodation as part of this deal, so we will be housing those staff and be able to maintain those really good close contacts that we have that really help that partnership work really well together. I think that's probably all I want to say, and I'm just open to any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That's very well explained. So, comments, members. David.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to express on behalf of Most of the Future the help that the foundation has given with funding over the last 3 years. It's been much appreciated.
Thank you, and I think it's an indication, is it not, of the ability to be somewhat arm's length and grow your own field, as it were. So thank you for that. Andrew.
Thanks very much. Without wanting to sort of delve into the discussions that the trustees have had, I should probably declare an interest as a reserve trustee of the foundation in the event, but just to try and sort of get my head a bit more around about how it will actually work in practice, as I said, without micromanaging the process. But I mean, is it going to have its own website? Is there going to be a charge for the fact that it's sharing accommodation? Will the new members of staff have their own, as it were, area to work together, because collaboration and working together as a group is really important. I suppose the other thing is given that this is, at the end of the day, this is still Peak Park money, what checks and balances and processes will be in place so that we as an authority know just what's happening in relation to this this now separate organisation? Don't get me wrong, I'm not at all against it. As you know, I'm a massive supporter of it. I'm just trying to get my head around exactly how it will work in practice.
So I can assure you they already have their own website. So that's already there. They have their own independent IT systems completely that are independent from the authority already. The accommodation, yes, we'll work with Matt closely to make sure that the foundation staff will be together and they'll be able to kind of work really closely with with me probably to begin with.
It'll be free.
And it'll be free. Yeah, the accommodation is free. That's written into the agreement that we're writing with them. We have a current MOU with the foundation that actually, when you look at it, will need very little changing in it. The roles and responsibilities will need to change, but the MOU itself, there's very little. It needs refreshing and updating, but the basis of exactly what you said, how we work together, how we have that agreement, is there already, because the foundation is a separate body that was set up as such. So it's fine tweaking of what's already there and in place, because that was done so well by my colleagues when they set it up 4 years ago.
Ken.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of queries, and one following on from Andrew, really. Presumably the 20% decrease per annum is first off the 130,000, and then is it off the 104,000? So it's a sliding, yeah. The other is picking up on the point that Andrew made about monitoring and the like, and I'm obviously not privy to the content of the draft MOU, but whether or not there is or there should be some kind of mid-term review of progress towards, so that it's informing the development of the 20% reduction for the subsequent 2 years, that kind of thing, to reassure ourselves that the point that Andrew was making, I think, but also to reassure ourselves that continued investment in the foundation is going to be well founded, because we are looking at 600,000 over the 5 years of public money.
Ken, I think that's an excellent point and has already been touched on by Andrew. I'll look to our Chief Executive, but I would recommend that we do have some point of review.
Yeah, I think we'd have to be clear as to what that meant, because what we want to do is we want this organisation to fly and succeed. If we put a caveat that halfway through we might withdraw the funding, it's going to be harder for them to attract quality candidates to fill their roles. So I think we need to offer them the assurance. So in a way, I think 5 years is a short enough period anyway, with a wind down. I think if we put a review period in midway through, it just ties their hands behind their backs, I think, and stops them really achieving as much as they possibly could. So I personally would be against it.
Could I just say a word before Ken comes? I think there's a difference between review and monitoring. And I think that's, as long as we maintain a good dialogue vis-a-vis monitoring, then that's strong. But I take Chief Exec's point that a review might cause a degree of nervousness halfway through the project. Does that satisfy your concerns, Ken?
Yeah, I use both words, and in fact, and should have used monitoring only.
No.
It wasn't the intent of stopping it in its tracks. It's just that the reassurance that monitoring ought to give both to, as I say, the future of our investment and the future of the foundation. I mean, it might be that there would be a need to delay that 20% in year 4 for whatever reason that might be appropriate for us to consider. But without monitoring it, we won't know.
Yeah, no, that's a point well made. Yvonne.
Thanks for your report, Sarah. I just want to say how much the foundation has been beneficial to different communities that I'm aware of in and around South Yorkshire, especially the Peak District Mosaic. And I think they're doing a very good job. I was going to ask about the monitoring. Will the foundation fall in line with the quarterly monitoring that we have for the Peak Park in terms of their role? Would they provide quarterly monitoring report? I'll put down the word review and quarterly monitoring, but I think you've answered about review. So I just wanted to ask that about quarterly monitoring.
I think it'll be the annual report that we get from the foundation.
Okay.
They won't be part of our quarterly reporting. That's for the authority. And I would say thanks for both yourself and David for saying great what the work the foundation's actually done. If you need a good news story at the end of today, do have a look through that foundation annual report, because it shows you some really fantastic things that we've been able to do with the money that the foundation has brought for us. and it will bring a smile to your face. So it's worth making sure you do that. You might need it.
One other point I wanted to check. Are there any current staff that's been paid by that's working with the foundation at the moment?
No, that's part of what gives us such a good opportunity at this moment to make this move. So at the moment we've got some interim arrangements where staff in the National Park are supporting the foundation. It means we haven't got any 2p issues or anything to consider, and it's a really good moment to make this move.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Yvonne. Janet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm supportive of this, and I think a sign of success is when dependents fly the nest, and this is what we're seeing here. But I'd like to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. Can I have... You have the recommendations in front of you. I won't take them individually. I'll take them collectively, if I may. All in favour? I'd say that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. We can let the rabble back in. Eh?